Hey guys, Jason here with RWBNetSec. And I first want to start off by saying thank you again to all of you who are supporting me in this channel. It really does mean a lot to me. And again, I'm also curious how you found my channel. So if you would, leave a quick comment below to let me know how it was you found me, whether you were just searching through YouTube, whether you found it through a Google search, or whatever it was. So in this video, we're going to be going over the injection options for SQLMap. I'm going to be using DVWA for a couple of the demos. So if you've got that in your lab environment, go ahead and fire it up if you want to follow along. Of course, the attacking machine is going to be Kali Linux, so make sure you've got that started up as well. And with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So as you can see here, I have a list of the injection options that are available. There's not a lot of them here, but we're going to take our time and go through each one of them. Of course, as usual, we're just going to start at the top of the list and work our way down. So as you can tell by the description, these specific options are used to specify the parameters that you're testing for, as well as allowing you to provide custom injection payloads. And the use of these Tamper Scripts, which I know I've had some of you asking about. So we're just going to work through each one of these. Not all of them are going to include demos, but I will be showing some demos where applicable. So let's go ahead and get started with the first one here. Oh, and I did want to mention quick too that if you are following along with the video, one other virtual machine that I'm running in the lab is Metasploitable 2, and that's the one I'm actually going to be accessing DVWA from. So either way, just as long as you've got DVWA accessible to you in the lab. So anyway, back to the switches here. The first two that we're going to look at are going to be the TAC-P, which allows you to specify the parameter that you're testing for, and this TAC-TAC skip option, which will let you skip a parameter for testing. So in this part of it, there will be a demo, so let me just minimize this. Let's fire up a browser quick and make sure that we can access the DVWA machine. So it's 61. And we'll just log in with the default username and password for DVWA, which is admin and password. I'm going to make sure that the security setting is on low. And then I'm going to click on this SQL injection link here. So as you know, if you've watched the other videos, if you're working with DVWA and using SQLMap, you will need the cookie information to pass along because of the PHP session ID that DVWA uses for connection. So in order to get that info, I'm just going to go to the Cookies Manager add-on that I've got for Iceweasel. And you can see here's my session ID, so I'm just going to copy that so we'll have it. And then I'm just going to minimize the browser again. So for this part of it, we're looking at being able to specify a parameter for SQLMap to test. And the reason that you would do this, say that you've manually done some testing on the app, and you find out that there's one specific parameter that you know is injectable. And maybe there might be multiple parameters that are being passed, whether it's a GET request or a POST. So instead of having SQLMap test all of those parameters, you can tell it to just focus on the one that you know is vulnerable. So in this case, we know that the ID parameter is vulnerable with the SQL injection. So our command is going to be SQLMap TAC-U, and then we'll give it the URL to the machine. 61. Question mark ID equals, and I'm just going to put 1 for the value right now. Submit equals submit and the hash. All right, I'm going to go ahead and add in the cookie parameter so we can get that part out of the way. And the parameters that are passed with the cookie, you've got two. There's the PHP session ID, which we copied from the cookie manager. And make sure that you put a semicolon between the parameter value or the parameter names. And the other one is the security setting, which we've got ours set to low. Just put the double quote there to close it out. And now I'm going to use the TAC-P switch to specify the parameter that we want SQLMap to test. So in this case, it's the ID parameter. So you just put that between double quotes. And for this one, I'm just going to do a TAC DBS. And I'm also going to add the TAC batch option so we don't have to answer any of the questions. So hopefully, if this works correctly, SQLMap should only test that ID parameter. So let's go ahead and hit enter here. And you'll see here, of course you probably won't see this on yours, and the reason that this error is coming up on mine is because I also have Security Onion running in another machine, and that will be coming into play later. I guess I should have probably shut it down until I got to that point, but it doesn't stop the attack. So you can see that the payload was successful, and we were able to get back the database names that were contained on that server. So SQLMap only tested the ID parameter instead of going through, and it did not ask us to test the submit parameter or any others that may have been passed. If you were looking at a different kind of web app that maybe have multiple parameters, with this switch it would only test the one that you specify. And in that same vein, if we come back to the options here, this TAC skip is basically just the opposite of using this TAC-P. So instead of with this one specifying a parameter to test, with the TAC skip option, you're telling SQLMap to skip a certain parameter. So I'm not going to actually demo that here, but it would work in the same way. You could just do TAC skip here and then specify the parameter that you wanted SQLMap to not look at but test everything else. And this would come into play if you were using maybe if you had your scanning level set higher, maybe like on level 5, and you know that SQLMap, if you set the level higher, that it's going to test more places for injection, such as the user agents and the headers. There's like 3 or 4 of the headers that it will test for SQL injection. So if there's one of those that you don't want tested, use the TAC skip option and then specify the one that you want. So in this case, if you did not want SQLMap to test the, let's just say the user agent, then you would just put the TAC skip and then put user agent here, and then SQLMap would bypass that when it was running its scans against it. Now the next two parameters or switches, that we're going to look at will be the TAC Dbms and TAC Dbms TAC Cred. So basically with this one, with the TAC Dbms, if you know what your backend database is, whether it's MySQL or MS SQL or Postgres or whatever it is, you can use this switch to tell SQLMap what the database is, so that SQLMap skips its fingerprinting stage. Sorry, I'm getting my words twisted here. So for instance, at our command line here, if we know on this one that the back end for DVWA is running on MySQL. So I could come in here and add the TAC DBMS. Let me just delete this part out here. And then do an equal sign and then do MySQL. and that will just speed up your SQLMap scanning against the target. It will bypass the fingerprinting section, but only use this option if you are absolutely sure you know what the backend database is. Otherwise, just leave this off, because SQLMap will automatically try to figure out what it is for you. And then the other one, of course, was the Dbms Cred. And that just allows you to specify, if you happen to, if you maybe know a username and password for the database, if you want to try default credentials for like MySQL, if it was set to root in a blank password, then you could feed that in with this switch and have SQLMap try to connect to the database with that username password combo. Now the next option that we're going to look at is the TAC OS option. And what this does, with this one, you can specify the back-end operating system that you think is running on the web server, whether it's Windows or Linux. And I think right now those are the only two options that SQLMap supports. I believe there's a move to add others in the future, but right now it can either be Linux or Windows. So here, if we just come to the command line, we could do TAC OS equals, and in this case I know Metasploitable is running on Linux, so I could come in here and just put Linux in for the OS. And let's just hit enter on this and see what happens. And you can see here that it does match Linux Ubuntu 8.04. So that option was successful. And again, this is another one of those that if you're not absolutely sure what the back-end operating system is, you probably don't want to use this switch, but it's there if you want to. So for the next two options that we're going to look at, we have this TAC invalid big num and invalid logical. And both of these kind of serve the same purpose. So if you are doing a manual SQL injection, let's pull our browser back up here. I'll go ahead and just hit enter for this. So sometimes if you're doing a manual injection, that maybe it's with this one it's using a GET request. And like if you're going to use a union query to do your attacks, that you always come in here and you'll want to make this value negative. If it's an integer here, you make that a negative and then continue on adding your union select whatever you're putting in. So with these switches, with this invalid big num, it basically does the same thing. It's just another way to negate the value for the parameter that you're testing. With big num, SQLMap is going to put in large numbers, and it would be a number that's more than likely not contained within the database. So, maybe like 999,000 or something like that, just to make that value negative. And the same way with the invalid logical, this is actually going to add in a false Boolean statement. So let's go back up here, and it would be something like if you had ID equals 1 and 2 equals 3, something like that. So this switch, the invalid logical, is going to add in something like this to make this a false parameter. It's just basically another way of negating that value to continue on with your injection payloads. So the next one that we're going to look at here is this no-cast switch. So no-cast was added to SQLMap to take care of a problem that they saw when trying to retrieve data from older versions of MySQL. So by default, SQLMap uses the cast function, and it casts data to strings when it's trying to retrieve data from the database. This was a problem with old versions of MySQL where the retrieval was not working properly, so this option was added. You're probably mostly going to see this if you have legacy applications that you're trying to test against. So this may be one of the switches that you probably don't use too often, but it's there if you need it. So then the next one that we look at is this no escape switch. So by default, when SQLMap sends an injection payload, it tries to escape all of the single quotes that are in the payload. And that kind of helps to obfuscate the payload and maybe potentially bypass any security mitigations that may be implemented by the server, such maybe like the use of magic quotes or the MySQL real escape string. You can use this switch here to prevent SQLMap from escaping those characters. And that will cause your payload size to be smaller, but then you also run the risk of your injection being caught by the filters. So this is one you can play around with. I wouldn't recommend using it unless just absolutely you have to, whether you're trying to control the size of your payload. But just know that if the company is running like an IDS or a WAF or something and they see those single quotes coming through, it may either flag on your injection or may stop it altogether if it's maybe an IPS or a web app firewall. So the next two parameters or switches that we're going to look at will be the TAC prefix and the suffix switches. So these are going to come into play probably most of the time if you're doing a blind SQL injection attack. So what this is going to be used for, and if you've got any experience working with maybe cross-site scripting, you'll know that when you enter your injection payload, that sometimes you have to put a prefix and a suffix in it in order for the query to be syntactically correct and give you back the results that you're looking at. And it's possible that you may run into the same thing with SQL injection. So let me just come back up here to the URL. I'm going to delete everything out here and just leave the ID parameter for right now. So in this instance, right now we know it works with the prefix of the value of the parameter, which in this case is 1, and then we put a single tick. And after the single tick is where we enter our actual payload. So I could do, if we did like order by 10 or whatever. And the suffix is going to be in this case, will be the comment portion of it. So whether it's the 2 dashes or if we put a hashtag like this or whether we're using, comments or something like whatever it may be as a suffix so that our payload gets executed correctly. So in this instance, you may come across a web app where you know that it's vulnerable to an injection, but just doing a basic injection attempt is not working. And the reason it's not working is you may have to have the correct prefix and suffix. Now, it's possible that if you have an error-based SQL injection, that if the error that comes back to you is verbose enough, it may actually show you what the back-end query looks like. And you can take that query from the error message and use that to build out your prefix and suffix and your payload that you're going to send over to retrieve data from the database. So that's basically what these two switches are used for. You just do this for the prefix, whether it would be like a single quote and maybe a parenthesis or whatever it needs for that part of the query. And then for the suffix, you would do the same thing. Just put in whether it's the double dashes or the hash sign, inline comments, whatever it may be that you want to use as a suffix in order for your specific injection to work properly. And that's something that you may have to experiment with in order to get it to work correctly. And now the last one, which is probably the most interesting switch in this category, is the use of the Tamper switch. So basically what this is, As I mentioned before, sometimes you will come across a web application that's being protected by either a web app firewall, or maybe there's an IDS or an IPS in place that are looking for specific attacks coming against that web app, whether it's SQL injection, cross-site scripting, command injection, whatever it is. So SQLMap provides this tamper option here. And basically what this does, let's go have a look at it quick here. Let's just minimize that. There's a folder in place with the with SQLMap that contains a list of Tamper scripts that you can use. So let me just go ahead and pull that up here. Under user, share, SQLMap. So you go to user, share, SQLMap, and then go inside this Tamper folder here. And these are all Python files. And you can see each one of the Tamper scripts is named based on what that specific one does. So if you open up one of these in just a text editor, you can see, let's see here, each one of these is going to give a description of what it specifically does. So you can see this one replaces the apostrophe character with its UTF-8 counterpart. And then it shows you exactly here what the payload is going to look like. So why is this useful? So by default, when SQLMap sends an injection payload to the web app, there's no obfuscation going on except with the single quotes that I mentioned earlier. So if there is a web app firewall or an IDS in place, it's more than likely going to flag on something that's in your payload, whether it's just say that you're using a union select statement in your payload. Some of the signatures in these WAFs or IDSs are going to look for the word select or union, and they're going to flag. They're going to either alert on that payload coming through, or they're going to block the attempt completely so that you're not going to get anything back at all. And that's why these tamper scripts are used. So you can specify one of these scripts. And one thing to note, before you just blindly go off and start trying to use these, some of these are specific to certain backend databases. For instance, MySQL or MS SQL. So before you try to use these against a web app, if you already know that the backend is like MySQL, and you want to use a tamper script, be sure that you open up the file and see which databases it's designed for. Some of them are open to any of them, and some of them are specific. So like this one, you can see the requirement is either MySQL or MS SQL. No, I don't want to save anything. So let me pull up the terminal here. Let's go ahead and clear the screen. And I'm just going to show you, as far as the command line goes, this is what the command is going to look like. Let me just clear out some of this data here. I'll go ahead and leave the batch on. So to use the tamper scripts, you just do the tamper equals, and then you put the name of the tamper script that you're going to use. So since I already know that the backend on this one is MySQL, let's just use this one here, MySQL dash. So now SQLMap is going to use this tamper script, and it's going to obfuscate the data based on what this particular script does. So let's hit enter and see what happens here. All right, you can see that it did come through because, and this is where the other virtual machine that I have running comes into play. Let me see if I can actually get it pulled up here so you can have a look at it. This is Security Onion, which I have set up, and I have Snort running on it with the SQL rules for Snort. So you can see that it is catching, it's alerting on SQL injection attempts. Now, for this video, I wanted to be able to come on here and show you some flashy way to bypass every web firewall and IDS that's out there, but the reality of it is that's not always possible, especially if you're running the latest rule sets. And let me show you here. Let's see. Look at these counts here. I'm just looking at the counts to see. I don't know if I can. Well, let's run this again and see. Eight. I'm trying. I think I've got this one set up to where I can kill these alerts. At least most of them anyway. Let me see if I can get these cleared out so we can see when an alert is actually coming through. And if you've not used Security Onion before, it's definitely something that I would check out. It comes with this software installed on it by default. It's authored by Doug Burks. I think he's the project lead who put this together. The machine is running Snort, or I believe Suricata is on here. And it also has these interfaces. I've got Squirt and Squeal running, which gives you an interface to see the alerts that are coming across. It's fairly simple to set up. And actually I'd say there's a lot of companies that are actually using Security Onion in a production environment to do some network monitoring. So if you've not looked at Security Onion, pull that up when you get a chance and have a look at it. It's actually very useful. So let me go back here. All right, you can see the alerts have cleared out. Now if I go in here, run this again, and pull Security Onion back up. Let's see which one I'm on. I think maybe it's not. Let's see, 2131. Sorry guys, this is where live demos can get you sometimes. I'm just looking to see if the count is actually changing for these alerts. And I'm not seeing. We're getting SQL. And if you look here, you can click on one of the alerts that comes up and it will actually show you the rule that was triggered. This is the Snort rule that was triggered when it saw the injection payload coming across. So in the time that I've spent playing around in my lab with the Tamper Scripts, none of the scripts that I ran were able to get through without throwing up some kind of alert in Snort. Which means that if I was doing this live on a company network, their monitors were going to see my attacks coming through. And that's something that you need to keep in mind when you're playing around with these. Now, with the Tamper Scripts, it is possible to use more than one Tamper Script at the same time. So, say for example, I wanted to use I don't know what, uppercase, for example. Let's just look at it and see what it does. Of course, I think it's kind of self-explanatory, but we can look and see which databases it runs against. And you can see that this one has been tested against all these 4 different databases. And all it does is replace each keyword character with uppercase letters. So you'd have an all uppercase select or union, whatever it may be, which I know that's not going to bypass. But if we wanted to use more than one tamper script, you come back to your command line and you just put a comma to separate each one of them, and you would run it like that. Hit enter. Just out of curiosity, let me look at Security Onion and see. I'm not seeing any new alerts coming up, but I'm not exactly sure that it's updating like it's supposed to. I have noticed it to be a little bit buggy at times, as far as being able to come back in and get messages. Let me close out. I'm going to close out of everything. Come back in to just load up the SQL interface. All right, it appears to be working. So I've got 21311. Oops. Well, I'm not actually seeing any alerts come across. Just for the heck of it, let me take the Tamper Scripts out and see if anything flags on this. If it doesn't, then we'll know that there's something wrong with Security Onion here. Doesn't appear to be updating like it's supposed to be. I'll try to reconnect to it. But anyway, I don't want to bore you guys with trying to get this to work, but basically you're going to want to, there's a couple of things that you'll want to do if you're going to start messing with the Tamper Scripts. One is you can use, you can see by default SQLMap comes with several scripts that you can play with. And like I said, you can add more than one at the command line at the same time. So SQLMap will, maybe do 3 or 4 different obfuscation types to try to bypass either the web app firewall or the IDS that's in place. Another thing that I found during my testing, another option that you'll want to add, and this was mentioned in one of the other videos, but this random agent, because by default, when SQLMap sends its requests over, the user agent that gets sent shows that it's coming from SQLMap. And a lot of the web app firewalls and the IDSs are going to see that SQLMap. They specifically look for that user agent to come across, and they will flag on it if they see it. So if you use this random agent switch, that will just throw in another user agent, and it will at least bypass that security check that a WAF is going to do. So that, in addition to the use of the Tamper Scripts. Now, at the same time, if you find that none of these specific scripts are working in your environment, and I would suggest that you also set up Security Onion or maybe set up Mod Security or something like that in your lab so you can test this. But you can create your own Tamper Scripts to use. And if you open up one of these, you can see this is the format. Basically, you just need to know a little bit of Python and just go by the same template that the rest of these are set up in. You'll need to know the modules that need to be imported, and then specify whatever the script is, or the obfuscation technique is, that you want to use for your Tamper Script. And this is where sitting and playing around with these is going to come into play, and it could actually take you some time. I've actually seen where people will have contests, like the developers of SQLMap will go against the developers of Mod Security, and they will see if they can bypass the latest Mod Security rules. And if they do, then of course mod security is going to learn how they bypassed it, and they're going to write a rule, so it's kind of like a cat and mouse game with these. As soon as a new technique comes out where they're able to bypass that particular product's rules, that product will update its rule set, and then you have to go back and try to figure out another way to bypass it. So it's just ongoing like that, and that's what you're going to run into with Tamper Scripts. So that's basically going to do it for this video, guys. I hope you did find it informative, and that it maybe gave you some ideas on things that you can try during your own testing, especially if you do get in and start messing around with these Tamper Scripts and try to create your own. I'm curious if you guys come up with ways to bypass either the latest snort rules or maybe the latest mod security rules. If you do come up with something, if you don't mind sharing, just leave it in the comments below and let the rest of the community know how it was that you found the bypass. So if you do have any other questions or comments, just leave them below. And as always, guys, I appreciate you watching. Hope you guys have an awesome day, and stay tuned because I will be continuing the SQLMap series, and there will be some other videos coming out. I'm going to be getting back to some of the other tools within Kali as well. I've had a couple of requests to do some tutorials on password cracking, like using Hydra and some of the other tools. So be watching for those coming up in the next couple of weeks. So have an awesome day, guys, and I will talk to you later. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If it's your first time here, I would love if you subscribe to the channel and share it out with all of your friends. So my hope is to build a community where we can help each other learn and grow in security, especially if you're just getting into it. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. And again, thanks for watching. I hope you all have an awesome day. See you guys.